This is Closereads.
A philosophy podcast with Mark and Wes.
I'm Wes Alwan.
And I'm Mark Linsenmeyer. It is a new dawn for Closereads, but yet more of the same. On Partially Examined Life, we have just now started reading more of Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, and in fact have rejected the Peach copy, the Miller translation, in favor, at least temporarily, for the Terry Pinkard version, which is one that is available online. And I wanted to look at another part of the self-consciousness chapter. So we sort of started our whole treatment on Partially Examined Life with the self-consciousness chapter, including the famed master-slave dynamic that we just talked about in our last episode on Fanon, commenting on that. But then right after that was the Stoicism part that we have treated on this podcast, where it's some kind of something has gone wrong in the process of self-consciousness, in that the person sees himself as entirely, I am the essential, only what I think of things, right? As Epictetus says, what happens out there doesn't matter unless I deem that it matters. That's not the quote for Epictetus. Do you remember the exact quote? Nothing's good or bad, but thinking makes it so. That's at least
that's Shakespeare, but yeah, that's
right. Oh,
but that's the Stoic credo. Yeah,
it is nothing to me, right? The external events are nothing to me. It's only my own virtue, my own reactions to things. So, but in any case, Hegel thinks this is pathological, because you are denying the reality and that it matters of the external world. And then right after that is a short section on skepticism, which he just sees as just worse than Stoicism, in that you're not just saying it doesn't matter from a values perspective, but I'm not even sure it's there. That's why it doesn't matter from a values perspective, because for all I know, I could be a brain in a vat, etc. So actually, Descartes ends up having, insofar as he outlines in Ethics at all in his works, is a Stoic. But right after that, so this is going to be section 206, which is in the Terry Pinkard translation, page 123, or PDF, page 170, in the link that I will probably send you, unless I just clip out this bit, on the unhappy consciousness. So the whole section is just called Stoicism, Skepticism, and the Unhappy Consciousness. And I was thinking, we already discussed on this podcast the section after this on reason, and I thought this was easily skippable. It's just another pathological state in which I have some sort of externalized voice in my head. I have divided the self, but I haven't closed the circle. I haven't realized that this is actually me. So that's unhappy. But in recently reviewing this section, in running up to a teaching session, I discovered this was way more involved and strange than I thought. So I thought it was worth our time to actually read through it. Do you have any memories of this? Or
well, coincidentally, I was just reading about it yesterday in the Routledge guidebook to Hegel's Phenomenology, which I highly recommend. Yeah, I had gotten to this section in the Routledge guidebook. So we're gonna be discussing a stage that grows out of skepticism, and I think it's describing although I'm not sure, even after reading the guidebook, because I have to go over it, but I think we're talking about Stoic or early or medieval Christianity as inspired by Stoicism to some extent, but it although it supposedly grows out of skepticism. So we're going to find a new internal contradiction and really a form of alienation that supposedly will that the unhappy consciousness will try to resolve by such things as asceticism or devotion and prayer, this kind of alienated version of God where we try to overcome the distance between him and us, but can't really do it.
Yeah, that was what surprised me, is I didn't remember that there was talk of priests, that there was an overtly religious element when we haven't yet gotten to the religion section in this book. I thought it was just, we get our self built by running into another self consciousness, and now I'm a
Hmm.
self consciousness, recognizing you as a self consciousness. Yay, we are together as spirit, and we already saw in our looking through the reason chapter that comes right after this, that at least there are more steps in between there, that there's this whole, well, let's be idealists. So everything ends up being a subdivision of the I. Every category of thing that I can scan before me. What happens to other people in that situation? Uh, it seems like it's pathological in some ways, just like what we've been talking about here. All right. Well, so we're zooming in on this little bit. Let's see how much of it we can get through. Section 206. Please proceed, Wes.
In skepticism, consciousness experiences itself in truth as a self-contradictory consciousness. From out of this experience, there then arises a new shape which brings together the two thoughts which skepticism keeps asunder. That's two very clear sentences from Hegel. Can we get a third?
I mean, we don't
The
know what he's
Eureka.
referring to
If you can put,
exactly, but
it's just there's no in itself or um, anyway. Skepticism's thoughtlessness about itself has to vanish because it is in fact one consciousness that has these two modes in it. This new shape is thereby one that is for itself the doubled consciousness of itself as self liberating, unchangeable, self equal self consciousness, and of itself as absolutely self confusing, self inverting, and it is the consciousness of its being this contradiction. In Stoicism, self consciousness is the simple freedom of itself. In skepticism, it realizes itself and annihilates the other aspect of determinate existence. But on the contrary, it doubles itself and is to itself now something twofold. The doubling, which was previously distributed between two singular individuals, the master and the servant, is thereby brought back into one singular individual. Although the doubling of self consciousness within itself, which is essential in the concept of spirit, is thereby present, its unity is not yet present, and the unhappy consciousness is the consciousness of itself as doubled, as a doubled, only contradictory creature. So what he's talking about, right? In Stoic freedom, we had some measure of independence from the world because our right, there's nothing good out there in itself. It's all that part is all in the head, and if we realize that, we can be more less flustered by the world with the world. That's the wrong word, but that's just for some reason the one that came to mind. And then with skepticism, right, everything is just appearance, as you pointed out, Mark. It's we can't know. I think we. It's not just that we can't know what is true, right? The things in themselves are inaccessible, but um, the part that we do have access to, in a way, is constructed, right? So it annihilates the other aspects of determinate existence. Um, but what's this doubling part?
right. Although the doubling of self consciousness within itself, which is essential to the concept of spirit. So that's interesting. I mean, we know just from the very beginning of the self consciousness chapter that to have any sort of sense of self consciousness, you have to double it. You have to. Well, let's see. So initially, the breaking off is the uh, just trying to look at myself. And so basically, you create a me. You have the I, the observing part, and you have the me that you're looking at. That's not yet a fully doubled self consciousness because I immediately realize that the I is the me. That was the whole point. I'm trying to look at myself. As we go through and get to master and slave, then we say essential for this not to just be a short circuit that is just this cycle that completely whips around really fast, which he does think is life, right? There's something, it is the dialectic. It is an example of the dialectic, is maybe the prime example of the dialectic, but we need a full something that we recognize as a separate self consciousness And that sort of makes us stop and beefs up our sense of self-consciousness. So, and as you were pointing out at some point, right, we couldn't recognize another person as another self-consciousness unless we somehow had this capability. We were primed for it, right? It's sort of like Chomsky's, you have to have this whole language system ready in order to learn language. That, no, talking to your dog is never going to like give it a sense of self-consciousness in the way that you have a sense of self-consciousness. It is not ready for that. So part of that is to be able to internalize somebody else's self-consciousness as a second self-consciousness within your own consciousness, right? To imagine it, to put yourself in the other person's shoes, to see through their eyes, because you can't literally see through their eyes. So you have to have a doubled self-consciousness. And this is what is required to really recognize somebody else as an other, and trade ideas with them. This is at least what I think that spirit is going to be, is just the ability for us to speak in a public space, a common language, trades ideas, memes. We're sharing a group mind in a certain way just because we have the shared culture.
Yeah. I mean, I think the doubling in this case, what the schism comes from the fact that, right, Kant gives us this kind of he gives something and then he taketh away. What he gives us is he allows us not to be skeptics about science by saying we have this immediate access to all the appearances. But then he says there's this beyond, there's these things in themselves from which we are inevitably alienated. And one of those is God. Um, so we can't know things in themselves. Only God, in a sense, can know things in themselves. But it doesn't take us out of tension with the desire to get to this beyond. And I think that's where, what we're going to see in the next sections are ways of these attempts by unhappy consciousness to bridge that gap in light of the fact that we can't have direct knowledge.
So, how would a transcendent beyond, what does that have to do with having a doubling of self consciousness within myself?
Because one part of me says I only have access to the appearances, they're just our appearances, and the other part says, oh, actually, there are things in themselves, I just don't have access to them. I think that's the epistemological layer. Um, but I
Well, how
think
self,
I
yeah, I'm not sure how self consciousness is involved in that at all. I mean, from an analytical point of view for Kant, it is a matter of an analysis of the self to say we only know the appearances because, as you said, we are constructing the appearances. But it's not even clear if you're just talking about, the description according to Kant, of a person in an ordinary knowledge situation. They're not engaged in transcendental philosophy. They're not engaged in self consciousness at all. And nobody said that in order
no,
to,
to know the
properly
appearances,
understand.
to know our constructions is to be that's a form of self-consciousness.
Hmm.
We put our minds into the appearances. The appearances are part us, part mind. He says
So
this
it's
in previous sections. Yeah,
sure, but it's
yeah.
self consciousness that we don't. Maybe you're describing exactly what the issue is here. It's a self consciousness that we don't know is a self consciousness, right? I don't know. I think that this glass, whatever,
Until
is
we
just
get
an
to
objective thing
Kant.
in the
Yeah,
world,
yeah,
but in fact, it is just knowing the glass is a form of self consciousness because I created the glass. The glass is part of myself. The glass is, as he's going to say in the reason section, a subdivision, or at least the category glass, the category physical object, the category unity, the category number. These are subdivisions of the category I.
yeah. From the standpoint of a Kantian, which I think when he's talking about skepticism here, he is right. It's Humean skepticism is partly the target. He was a bigger fan. He had more. I think he was fonder towards ancient skepticism than modern skepticism. But his target really here is modern skepticism, where I think Kant kind of gets lumped into that category, even though Kant is trying to say he's overcoming skepticism. To say that all we have access to is the appearances is very skeptical. idea. But you see, Hume doesn't worry about this distinction with with between the appearances and the things in themselves, right? Kant introduces that division, and that is, I think, the division on which unhappy consciousness is premised. Because for Hume, in a way, God does and other things in themselves just get bracketed out and they go away. But Kant says, "Ooh, no, we have to have, you know, uh, we're still it's still a matter of faith. We can't know things in themselves, but we can have this faith relation to them." And so that's the division. We're going to divide things into knowledge and faith. Um, I think it becomes clear. I think it becomes clear in these later sections. I'm not just
Sure, sure. I think
yeah.
you're causing me to rethink my whole interpretation of the uh, relation between these various parts of the book. In that, I thought that in the first few sections he's talking about knowledge, but then he makes this pivot to self-consciousness, which is not a form of knowledge of the outside world. It is trying to understand that I am a being that is engaged in relations with the outside world. Self-consciousness in the sense that we ordinarily understand it, that I can stop, I can eventually reason, right? It gains me freedom. So it's phenomenologically, but you seem to be saying that this whole thing is still working its way through the history of epistemology. So we have I'm not sure what figure is represented by the moment of force and understanding, but that we should interpret pretty much this whole section throughout, including master slave, as a Kantian comment on epistemology, and then per your uh,
Well,
interpretation of the
we're
reason
just
section.
following the sections on Stoicism and Skepticism, right? So
Yeah,
this is supposed to be unhappy consciousness is supposed to emerge out of a contradiction within skepticism. Um,
but
right.
is it a
So
contradiction
in
in the theory
skepticism,
of
consciousness
knowledge?
experiences itself in truth as a self-contradictory consciousness. The contradiction arises within skepticism,
So
and
I
you're
guess is it
yeah.
within skepticism as a theory of knowledge, or is it within skepticism as a form of life? Are those different things? Do you see what the difference is that I'm saying? Right? You could say,
Yeah, I mean, if you're thinking of for ancient skeptics, right? Yeah, there was a way of life associated with skepticism called ataraxia, where um, you
is that the
you refrain from
relaxation,
any. It's like just not being
tranquility?
perturbed,
Yep,
tranquility.
yep.
Yeah, you refrain from making any judgments about things. We can't know, and therefore, because you're not, it's there's similarities to to Stoicism, obviously, but because we can't know, we are we're not as perturbed by the world, right? Because all our desire and frustration, all those things follow on thinking that we know something about the world, and if we don't, then we can be more tranquil. So there is a way of life associated with ancient skepticism. I don't know, but I do think his target here is more modern skepticism. I do think he's pivoting off of the Hume and the immediate developments after that. And I don't know what way of life is associated with that, except that it's somewhat atheistic, I think, in Hume. But then in Kant, you get an attempt to have your cake and eat it too. And I think um, that's part of what's going on here is this division between wanting to say we can only know the appearances, but we can still have this other. Yeah, so we're alienated from things in themselves, but so somehow we're
Yes.
going to have these other relations like prayer and um yeah. It's a little
Uh,
unclear because I was making an association to medieval Christianity because of asceticism and prayer and things like that. Um but yeah. So like I mean this is part of the problem of this is it's not purely historical, right? Because Kant the medieval asceticism precedes Kant, obviously, and skepticism doesn't fit neatly into this because there's ancient skepticism and then there's modern, and the medieval comes in between, but whatever.
All right, let's read section 207. Because to itself, this contradiction of its essence is one consciousness, the unhappy and estranged consciousness within itself must always have in one consciousness that of an other consciousness. But just when it thinks itself to have achieved victory, to have achieved restful unity with the other consciousness, each must again be immediately expelled from the unity. However, its true return into itself or its reconciliation with itself will exhibit the concept of spirit that has been brought to life and has entered into existence, because in it, as one undivided consciousness, it is already a doubled consciousness. It, it itself is the beholding of a self consciousness in an other. It itself is both of them, and to itself, the unity of both is also the essence. However, for itself, it is to itself not yet this essence itself, nor is it yet the unity of both.
So we get a little recapitulation of some master slave stuff, and the way self consciousness is predicated on internalizing the consciousness of another, which I think he's just saying is not enough here at this point. Um, we're still divided in a sense. That doesn't mean that we've become a kind of unity.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So when it thinks itself to have achieved victory and to have achieved restful unity, each must be immediately expelled from the unity. Is that just because, right? If somehow if it's a real other person, then of course it is expelled from the unity, right? Even if I think somehow your conception of me and my conception of me, I've internalized you as a super ego or something, but I realize that that's all me. Uh, how does the internal version of you, of society, need to be expelled again immediately? Like the actual you out in the world, of course you need to be if I think for 1 second we're one, like, well, that doesn't work out because you have a transcendence and your own shit going on. But if I've already internalized it and it's just you are the voice of Norman Bates's mother, you become internalized. uh can't I just get over that and realize, oh, this is actually just me talking and achieve tranquil unity? Why does it invariably, not just in pathological cases like his, have to be expelled?
Um, yeah, other than pointing to the division, that he points to in 206, which I gave my interpretation. It may turn out to be wrong, but as having something to do with the division that arises from within skepticism. I don't know how else we explain this schism here that's coming. So it itself is both of them, and to itself, the unity of both is also an essence. However, for itself, not yet this essence itself, nor is it the unity of both. Um, yeah, I think we're gonna have to read on to figure that out.
All right.
Well, at first, it is only the immediate unity of both. But while for it, the two are opposed consciousnesses and not the same consciousness, one of them, namely the simple unchangeable, is to itself as the essence, the other, however, the manifoldly changeable as the inessential. Um, for it, both are essences and are alien to each other.
That are alien to each other. Yep.
That are alien to each other. I'm just wondering. Maybe I'll just read the next sentence and then we'll talk. Because it is the consciousness of this contradiction, it itself takes the side of the changeable consciousness and is itself inessential. All right. So the contradiction here maybe the previous section isn't exactly about rest with the other consciousness. The other consciousness, yeah, I don't know that that's master slave in 207. I think it's just the two sides, the two consciousnesses that come out of the split in 2006, in 206. Right. So when he says the one consciousness and the other consciousness, he's just talking about the two sides of the split. Um,
If it doesn't make sense to us to say that the thing in itself, the Kantian inaccessible, is necessarily a self-consciousness, we at least can think that that includes, and this is going to be very important for the the previous and the following section, other people. So it's certainly not one self-consciousness that I think is the rest of the world, but it involves self-consciousness. I'm recognizing the world as at least one instance of self-consciousness, and obviously many instances of self-consciousness, and maybe a bunch of things that are not self-consciousness, but that's not what necessarily we're worried about. So if you see, right, this is why I was talking about a form of life, that it if I'm skeptical about the existence of other minds, that's a real personal problem. That's not just an epistemic mistake. That is narcissism. That is, I am positing myself as the essential, right? This is kind of why Stoics make me a little sick, because, oh, it only matters what I think of things, what other people think of things. Oh, that doesn't matter. Like, that's a great defense mechanism when you're Norman Bates trying to fend off your mother. But when you're just trying to live in a world with people, like, you actually, this is Rorty talking through me, you actually have to subject your views, your opinions about what is good and bad, to a social enterprise that we are engaged in together. That is going to be what spirit is. So it is, you're trying to say, I don't have to participate in the public spirit. I'm self-contained. I can either, from a values perspective, or with Stoicism, with a values and knowledge perspective, just say, what I've got going on here, this self-consciousness, this is the essential. What is out there is the inessential. I'm not really realizing, per the whole Kant, Fichte, whatever, that I am somehow implicated in both, and I have to regard both as essential, and actually ultimately as me, in a sense, right? I end up being the social in a certain way, right? I'm not because we're Emersonian, all of our souls are merging, but because the software that I use to think is public, is open source public software, and you're a fool if you think that you just created all that yourself, for instance.
yeah. I'm still trying to. I'm still feel like I'm not understanding. So sorry. Um, I think right. So I think now I'm thinking. Well, understanding in this in Kantian terms is helpful, but maybe really he is focused on ancient skepticism. That's one thought. Um, or at least the kind of right Greeks, ancient Greek skepticism precedes Stoicism, but it, I think, but then there's a Roman version that's kind of contemporaneous with Stoicism. But in any case,
Were
I
the
think that when
ancients concerned, do you recall, with the problem of other minds specifically? I thought they were
well,
more
I think in
encountering like the pre-Socratics and the folks like that were wondering, like, what is the ultimate basis of matter? And they were like, well, we can't know. I'm fine with that.
yeah, I'm trying to figure out what this division is between the two consciousness in consciousnesses in an unhappy consciousness, and I think one of them has access to the appearances, but the other is bothered by not having access to things in themselves and the beyond and all that. That's the working hypothesis. And that goes whether it's for ancient skepticism or for modern skepticism. Um, but now we're getting some kind of in 207 we're trying to fuse that with master slave stuff. Must always have in one consciousness that of another consciousness. Um, uh, which I so at 2-7, all right, we kind of bracketed. It's not fully clear yet. And then 208, the two are opposed consciousnesses and not the same. One of them is to itself as the essence. The other is
The simple
cha-
unchangeable.
right.
Yep.
Um, so okay, so now we get a contrast between the unchangeable essence, and the changeable, which is inessential. And so maybe is the unchangeable essence like the substance,
I was thinking it was the
Cartesian
Cartesian
substance, or
subject, the
yeah,
cogito, that
yeah.
is unchangeable, and then the rest, the phenomena, the things that are. So I'm not
So it's almost
committing. Yeah.
yeah, it's almost like the distinction, Kant's distinction between noumenal self and then phenomenal self, for the ego as appearance, right? Our inner psychological life, which is a flux and a change. Um,
But
so
but am I to
yeah, okay.
myself the right? I thought for Kant, the one that I have actually access to is the phenomenological self. So that
Yeah.
I would identify the flux as me, right? Because he's basically a human on this point. Whereas the transcendental self, the soul, is posited as the simple, unchangeable beyond. But it seems like Hegel is saying the opposite of that here. He's saying that what I identify myself as, right, as maybe the Cartesian cogito, is not with the flux that I'm beholding, but with the simple observer that does not change, but that
Well, I
then
would even
everything
yeah.
else becomes the flux, the world that I'm beholding, the world that I, as Stoic, was saying is unimportant, the world that is, as skeptic, I was saying, I don't know the meaning of any of this. It's just a play of images.
Yeah, I would go farther than observer, that aspect of the Cartesian, and say, yeah, self is substance. So the unchangeable
Yeah.
substance versus the flux, yeah, the myself, the phenomenal self as I experience it. Okay, stream of consciousness. For it, both are essences that are alien to each other. All right, so this is now making sense to me, because it is the consciousness of this contradiction it feels. It itself takes the side of the changeable consciousness and is to itself the inessential. Okay, takes the side of the changeable consciousness. I kind of get that based on what we've been saying. It is to itself the inessential. Um, if it's taking side of the changeable, how does it become to itself the inessential?
Um, Simply unchangeable is to itself as the essence. The other is the inessential, but for it, from the point of view of the inessential, which we can sort of, it's part of us. So we could put our we could imagine ourselves in its shoes. For it, both are essences that are alien to each other. So from the point of view of the flux itself and the supposedly unchangeable self that I think that I am are alien to each other. I'm not sure why he's saying that.
But in the contradiction, it takes the side of the changeable and then
Yeah.
is to itself the inessential. What what is to itself the inessential? The consciousness of the contradiction is to itself the inessential. Maybe that's what.
Yes. So the inessential side is the consciousness of the contradiction. Whereas I could just from the naive point of view, right, seeing myself as the essential and sort of just dismissing everything else. I don't see it as my contradiction. I just see it as something I'm not going to worry about,
Yeah,
right?
I
Because
think
I'm in
that's what's
ataraxia.
going on here. Yeah,
But you do
bracketing.
realize that this is a real conflict on some part of you, the
Yeah,
part of you that you're rejecting, that you're abjecting,
but this
that
is yeah. I just bracket out the whole problem of the noumena and don't think about it, and then take the side of yeah, right, the phenomenon. All right. However, as consciousness of unchangeableness or of the simple essence, it must at the same time concern itself with freeing itself from the inessential. Um, well, that to me means the changeable then. Anyway, freeing itself from
but
the
what is the
inessential.
it here? Is the it still the side of the inessential, which it was in the previous paragraph? Because it is the consciousness of the contradiction. It
Well,
itself takes the size of the changeable concepts and is to itself the inessential. However, as consciousness of unchangeableness or the simple essence, so are we going back to the first position, or are we still saying that somehow the second position has become now can detect simple essences from its side. I've lost track of the pronouns, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, the split is between consciousness of changeableness and of unchangeableness. So, as consciousness of unchangeableness, it must free itself from the inessential, which is the changeableness, which means to free itself from itself. For whether it is indeed for itself only the changeable and the unchangeable is to itself something alien, it is in that way itself simple and thereby unchangeable consciousness. It is thereby aware of the unchangeable consciousness as its essence, although it is still aware of it in such a way that for itself, it itself is again not this essence. The stance that it assigns to both thus cannot be an indifference of one to the other, that is, cannot be an indifference of itself with respect to the unchangeable. Rather, it is immediately itself both of them, and for it is the relation of both as a relation of essence to the inessential, in such a manner that this latter is to be sublated. Um, the latter inessential changeableness is to be sublated. However, while both are to itself equally essential and equally contradictory, it is only the contradictory movement in which the opposite does not come to rest in its own opposite, but instead newly engenders itself only as an opposite within.
Within it, yeah.
Oh, Hegel, you just degenerated into contradiction talk.
So this is not any easier than the Miller. It's making me want to just read the same section in the Miller and see if it's any clearer.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was yesterday I was comparing all the translations and I was finding Miller actually the most readable. But then we have to deal with his special language like the notion and all that stuff that these guys wanted to get rid of. So I would say we should investigate a little more before we choose a translation. Because I don't think right Seth and Dylan aren't going to start reading it, so we have time to do that. But anyway, yeah, I agree. I don't find this more clear than the Miller, and I don't find the Inwood clear either. I don't find any of them. The Miller, I think the Miller is probably the most clear so far, in my opinion. But
So let me just start reading section 208 that you just read in the Miller, and we'll see if it is significantly different at all. Uh, at the very least, I was sort of fumbling around to try to find it on the web while you were reading it. So I didn't get everything that you just read, and I don't want you to have to read it again. So I'm going to read this other translation.
all right, and I'm going to compare them as you read.
Okay, all right. Since it is to begin with only the immediate unity of the two, and so takes them to be not the same, but opposites, one of them, namely the simple unchangeable, it takes to be the essential being. But the other, the protean changeable, it takes to be the unessential. The word protean was certainly not right. The
Well,
two are
it's the protean is translated as simple. Wait, he
mm,
says the protean unchangeable.
the protean changeable.
Oh, that's it's translated as manifoldly changeable here. That's weird.
I mean, those don't
Very
mean the
different.
same thing.
No.
But the other, the protean changeable, it takes to be the unessential. The two are for the unhappy consciousness alien to one another. And because it is itself the consciousness of this contradiction, so here it's saying the unhappy consciousness is consciousness of the contradiction, whereas Pinkard was saying for it both are essences that are alien to each other. In other words, for the inessential side of the equation. This is just saying the unhappy consciousness, the whole phenomenon that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So this means a different thing. Uh, okay, for the unhappy consciousness alien to each other, because it is itself the consciousness of this contradiction. It identifies itself with the changeable consciousness and takes itself to be the unessential being.
Okay, so he says identifies itself with the changeable.
Yeah,
Pinkert
that.
says takes the side of the changeable, which is much less clear to me. So I think Miller, right? He's interpreting. Um,
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a benefit and a deficit at the same time. So Miller says takes the side of means. Pinkert is much more literal, I think. So
Hmm.
Miller is saying takes the side of means identifies itself with, which to me is a much clearer way of putting it if he's right about the interpretation. But yeah.
But at least we understand. We've read so much of the Miller that then his the word notion is not going to scare us. This identification, like this is what we
Yeah,
think is the
we
substance
might
of
need to
Hegel.
stick with the Miller
Yeah.
because so far, yeah, in my experience is it's an easy it's a more enjoyable read. It's a better, yeah, it's clear. But
But as consciousness of unchangeableness or of simple essential being, it must at the same time set about freeing itself from the unessential, i.e., from itself. For though it indeed takes itself to be merely the changeable, and the unchangeable is for it an alien being, yet it is itself a simple, hence unchangeable consciousness, and hence is aware that this consciousness is its own essence, although in such a way that, again, it does not itself take the essence to be its own. All right, so here I didn't. This is where I lost track of the pronoun in the Pinkard, and this at least I'm clear what the pronoun is referring to. Uh, right, the unhappy consciousness is taking itself to be. I think what is added here is as if there is uh, three homunculi. There is the point of view of the Stoic or the skeptic, that is pure, that is the observer. I was calling, you were saying it's a little more than that, and then the abjected other is the other consciousness that we're playing with. Whereas in Miller, it's like there's the unhappy consciousness is the overall phenomena that we're talking about, and you can just say the unhappy consciousness can sort of race from one side to the other. So it's as if there's a third, we got the id and the superego, and here's the ego that's running back and forth between them. I don't know if that's the same. Maybe this is less true to Hegel than Pinkart is being, but at least makes more sense to me.
yeah, um, I mean, I think he's making some interpretative decisions, but it's
Hmm.
that makes it much easier to read. Um, do you want to finish it? And
Yeah,
I think maybe we should try the Inwood here, at least a few sentences, just to
sure,
do a
sure. Why
full.
not?
But after
The
you're
atti-
done, all right, go ahead.
the attitude it assigns to both cannot therefore be one of mutual indifference. That is, it cannot be uh, indifferent toward the unchangeable. Rather, it is itself directly both of them, and the relation of the two is for it a relation of essential being to the unessential, so that this latter has to be set aside. But since for it both are equally essential and contradictory, but since for it both are equally essential and contradictory, it is merely the contradictory movement in which one opposite does not come to rest in its opposite, but in it only produces itself afresh as an opposite. I've again lost the thread just in trying to pronounce these words in a row.
Mhm.
So
All right,
despite
let's try Inwood. Third time's a charm. We're sure we're gonna fully understand this now.
what
Um,
page in Inwood?
PDF page 137,
All right, so you're still going to read 208,
136, bottom of
208 yet again?
136.
Okay,
Yeah.
go right ahead.
Um, okay. Since it is initially only the immediate unity of the two, um, okay. But for it, the two are not the same, but opposed. One of them, namely the simple unchangeable, is to it as the essence. But the other, the multiple changeable, okay, multiple was manifold and multiple was protean in the other translations. The multiple changeable is as the unessential. I don't really like multiple changeable. I think manifold would be better there.
Yeah,
Is as the unessential.
I mean protein. So what do you think? What does protein actually mean?
Well, I mean, a
Something
lot
is
depends on
versatile,
whether
adaptable.
is
Like
is
okay,
the
so
is
Proteus is
manifold.
this.
Yeah,
Proteus is the shape shifting god.
yeah. So right, so for Kantian, for Kant, like is this the same word that Kant used for the manifold? Right? Is this a term of art? There's a lot of questions here because if it's Kant's manifold, then that's just sense data, unorganized, buzzing confusion of sense data before they get organized by the categories. Um, so uh, probably not exactly, but it, it'd be interesting to know if he's using that word manifold and if it's supposed to be associated with that. I mean, obviously, there's at least a loose association because we're talking about the changeable. So that maybe the word protein is supposed to get at that shape shifting, unformed quality of the changeable, like the indeterminacy of the changeable.
Yeah. I just for some
Um,
reason was thinking of it as primal, but that's not what that means. So
um, all right. The multiple changeable is as the unessential. The two are for it essences that are alien to one another, and because it is itself the consciousness of this contradiction, it ranges itself on the side of the changeable conscious ranges itself. Okay,
takes the
there's a
side of,
takes the side of
identifies with.
identifies its yeah. Now it ranges itself on the side of the changeable consciousness and is to itself the unessential. But as consciousness of unchangeableness, or of the simple essence, it must at the same time set about freeing itself from the unessential, that is, freeing itself from itself. For though it is for itself only the unchangeable, and the unchangeable is for it something
Only the
alien.
changeable. You
Did I
just
say unchangeable?
yes, yes.
Oh, I meant this. I was thinking changeable. For itself only the changeable, and the unchangeable is for it something alien, yet it is itself simple, and hence unchangeable consciousness, a consciousness of which it is thus conscious as its essence, but in such a way that for itself, again, it itself is not the essence. The
What
position
does that
is
one sentence mean? What does that mean?
um, well, right, for itself only the changeable. That makes sense, right? With just our stream of consciousness, the way we grasp
Yeah,
ourselves. The
but it is
unchangeable is something
simple.
alien, right? There's this alien noumenal substance, Cartesian substance underneath that. Okay. The unchangeable is the alien, yet it is itself simple. All right, the it. So it's unhappy consciousness in general, or
I thought it was the side of the inessential that and maybe it's just a matter of
yeah,
whenever you take a point of view, then the locus of that point of view
yep.
is a simple.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah,
Yep,
and so that's like the Cartesian observer now, as opposed to the
yep.
Cartesian substance. And from that standpoint, yeah, yep. I think that's right. Um, so even though it's consciousness, it's like William James's spotlight, right? So
Yeah,
even though it's a stream of consciousness, there's also a spotlight.
yeah.
It
Great.
itself is itself simple and hence unchangeable. Consciousness, a consciousness of which it is thus conscious as its essence, but in such a way that for itself again, it itself is not this essence. Okay, I kind
I
of
mean,
get
this
that now in light
is
of this new way we're looking at it. Yeah, go ahead.
well, is it just because it is identified or unhappy consciousnesses are already identified the side one as the essence, the essential is the essence, and now hey, imagine yourself as side two. Put yourself in the range of the inessential. Hey, well, insofar as you're a point of view, you are simple.
Mm-hmm.
And so you are thus the essence, right? If it's your point
Mm-hmm.
of view, you're going to be. But I also recognize that I am a creation of the other side, of side A.
Mm.
And so I'm not the essence. And so it's sort of, you've created this fiction that realizes it's a fiction.
Yep. The
Okay.
position it assigns to the two cannot therefore be an indifference of them towards each other. All right. Yeah. They're not going to just, right? Because we flip back and forth between them.
Yeah.
That is not an indifference of itself towards the unchangeable. Rather, right? So we can't just say, bracket out the noumena and say, okay, maybe they're out there and, but we're
Hmm.
not going to think about it. Rather, it is itself immediately both of them, and the relation of the two is for it as a relation of the essence to the non-essence. Okay. A relation of the essence to the non-essence. Um,
So that the latter is to be sublated. But
So the relation of the two is a relation of the essence to the non-essence,
yeah,
whichever one we take to be the essence or the non-essence, because it flips back and forth.
yes.
Okay.
But since for it both are equally essential and contradictory, it is merely the contradictory movement in which the contrary does not come to rest in the contrary, but with it only generates itself anew as a contrary.
All
So
right.
is
So
this
it sounds
clearer
like it's
just because it's the
cycling. Yeah.
is this clear because it's the third time we've read it, or is it clear because it's a better
I was going to ask
translation?
the same question. I don't know yet. Maybe should we read 209 in the Inwood and
Yes,
see what
yes. Start with the
happens?
inwood.
All right.
Uh,
Here, oh,
here,
you go ahead.
yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
it's your
Here,
turn.
then, we have a struggle against an enemy, victory over whom is rather a defeat, where attainment of the one is rather the loss of it in its contrary. Consciousness of life, of its being there and activity, is only grief over this being there and activity, for it has in this only the consciousness of its contrary as the essence and of its own nothingness. It passes over out of this into an ascent to the unchangeable. But this ascent is itself this consciousness. So the ascent is the consciousness of the contrary, namely of itself as singularity. The unchangeable that enters into consciousness is by this very fact at the same time affected by singularity, and is only present with the latter. Far from having destroyed singularity in the consciousness of the unchangeable, singularity only emerges constantly in it.
By the way, the one benefit of the Inwood is he does a commentary where he explains each section at the end. Um,
Do we want to see what he says about this
sure.
section?
The other thing is he's translating Dasein as being there, which is kind of controversial because it's Heideggerian. Um, and then it's the way, let's see, Miller. Where is the Miller? Oh, you had the Miller up. I didn't have it up. Let's see the way Pinker translates it. Um, so consciousness of life of its existence. So Pinkard and Miller, I think, are both going to just say existence. Um,
Consciousness of life, of its existence and activity, is only in agonizing over this existence and activity, for then therein it is consciousness that its essence is only its opposite, is conscious only of its own nothingness. It seems about, well, so no, nothingness, that wasn't there before.
um, Wait. So why don't you read the Miller?
I was reading the Miller there.
Could you do the whole thing?
Yep. Um, yeah, here, this is 209, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. Here, then, we have a struggle against an enemy, to vanquish whom is really to suffer defeat, where victory in one consciousness is really lost in its opposite. Consciousness of life, of its existence and activity, is only in agonizing over this existence and activity, for therein it is conscious that its essence is only its opposite, is conscious only of its own nothingness. Raising itself out of this consciousness, it goes over into the unchangeable. But this elevation is itself this same consciousness. It is therefore directly consciousness of the opposite, namely of itself as a particular individual. The
Okay.
unchangeable, yeah.
So that's what. So Inwood calls that singularity, which I find to be very confusing, and Miller very conveniently says particular individual, which is very clear, much clearer. But go ahead.
Um, the unchangeable that enters into consciousness is through this very fact at the same time affected by individuality and is only present with the latter. Individuality, instead of having been extinguished in the consciousness of the unchangeable, only continues to arise therefrom. Extinguished in the
I think
consciousness.
we have to stick with the Miller,
Well, should we see
honestly.
what Inwood's commentary about this is?
Yeah.
Uh, the enemy is changeable in attaining.
Which page are you on?
So it's PDF page 570 in the Inwood. The enemy is the changeable. In attaining one of the opposites, the unchangeable, the overseer consciousness loses it in its opposite, the changeable, the overseer consciousness. Okay. It is discontented with its worldly life, regarding itself as nothing in contrast with the essence. So it ascends to the unchangeable, focuses its consciousness on it. But this ascent is performed by itself as singularity, and this infects the unchangeable. Singularity cannot be eliminated from its consciousness of the unchangeable, hence the victory is pyrrhic. Why switch from changeable? Why switch from changeable to singularity? Perhaps because it is more obvious that in its ascent it must remain singular than that it must remain changeable, but also prepare the way for the next section.
So
In,
Pinkert is also going to use individuality, not singularity.
mm-hmm.
Um, so this Inwood thing is just far too technical and wants to give some literal translation of the German that then we're supposed to figure out. It's not gonna work.
Well, and I don't know that because we said right Miller has his own rephrasing later in the book of these sections, and they don't really help that much either because
No.
they're still basically using the same terminology. And I see exactly the same thing in the Inwood here, but
Yep.
I
Yeah,
don't know
it's
that
just
this really cleared
gobbledygook.
anything up for me.
No. No.
Should we see what uh, Miller's own take on 209 is?
Yeah, give me a PDF page.
I'm flipping to the end here. Analysis. So in the 500s or 209 is PDF page 562 in the Miller that I just linked you to. And it has one sentence. 209 just Miller says what this whole thing means is the unhappy consciousness cannot unite itself with its unchangeable essence without importing changeableness into that essence and so starting a fresh cycle of struggle and misery.
Well,
I mean,
that's actually kind of helpful.
that's snappy. That does not just repeat the same.
Yeah, that's 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 helpful.
All right.
You know,
So
because
two points for
it's
Miller.
trying to get to the unchangeable, but it always imports changeableness in that process. Yeah, that is a nice little succinct way of putting it.
All right. Well, we have reached the end of our hour, and instead of learning almost anything about the unhappy consciousness, we have instead investigated the translations that are available and decided that we are right the first time. And Miller wins. And so I think the partially examined life, despite our, uh, I don't know if the other guys have put a lot of time into the pink herd.
No,
They
they
have
have
not
not.
even started it.
They have not started.
I had only started the first section as of yesterday and was like, this is hard. I
Yeah,
need to
same.
close read with you.
I read the first section yesterday, and then went to the Routledge guide. But yeah,
I mean, so and do we have you revisited the Greg Sadler half-hour Hegel lectures on these sections? I think you
I
had
haven't.
said that they were
I
not.
don't find them very helpful. I
Mhm.
listen to a lot of them. I don't. Yeah.
Is it because the same thing that we're pointing out with Inwood and is that he just uses the same language that he's describing and doesn't necessarily
It's
relate it to the
it's not
actual
exactly
world?
that. He's trying to be, but it's just too vague to
Uh-huh.
be helpful to me. It's um so it is like that in a way, but it's more. It's not that he's just repeating technical language. It's just that he's giving a very vague overview of what the subsection is supposed to be about. So I didn't find it helpful, but you might. I mean, I would
I definitely found them
definitely,
helpful
but
to like refresh, like after I had gone through my own uh very painful sentence by sentence, then to hear him read them. Okay, that reminds me, that's somebody else reading it. I mean, just any, did I say that I got the audiobook for this?
no.
Yes. So in teaching this self-consciousness chapter for the second time in the series of big books in continental philosophy, which of course is like my fifth time reading that section, the lordship and bondage. Uh, I just felt like it was right there in Audible. It keeps prompting it at me because I've gotten Being in Time and similar things, and so I
Hmm.
just like I'll use my Audible credit and I listened from the beginning, and just having the joy of an audiobook is it keeps cranking forward even if you kind of space out, and you can always jump back 30 seconds or whatever, but that as a way of reviewing, like, okay, this is so I was following through the preface, or there's the preface and then there's the another intro. I think the preface is the bad one. The preface is the one that he wrote when he finished the whole book. uh but I got through that and I thought I really understood it. Then the intro itself, which is great. Then the sense certainty and the perception. When I got to force and understanding, like, this is way longer than I remember it, and I almost completely tuned out. So I feel like that could. I know we already had an episode on it. I don't want to necessarily spend more time on it, but it was not as effective with that. But then, yes, for going through the sections that we were studying, that was fine. But then I let it keep going, and okay, even though we just covered the Stoicism in close reads, this was still challenging and surprising to me listening to it. I was still having trouble following every sentence. And then when it got to this unhappy consciousness, this is why we were doing this today, because like the audio just went on way longer than I remember the ideas being here. So uh if we were to, I guess here's the immediate question: do we want to do another session in the Miller on the unhappy consciousness next week, or do you want
Yeah,
to?
I do.
Okay, all right. So we'll
Um,
hopefully get to some of the actual ideas, other than there's something vaguely, schizophrenic, vaguely associated dissociated identity disorder in the unhappy consciousness. We've at least established that so far. There's a division that keeps reasserting itself, that is
yeah,
related to epistemology, but also in the way that we live in relation to epistemology.
yeah.
Okay, well, so we'll do that, and who knows how far we'll get in it, or how many sections we would have to. I guess this is now our third take on Hegel on this book in recent memory, and I am really interested to hear from our listeners whether this is helpful, whether this is painful, whether this is really only benefiting the two of us. Because if unless you're like actually following along on the page like we are, you just absolutely have no idea what's going on, or whether we are stumbling into the actual ideas enough that it makes it useful to you.
If
So let us
reading it
know.
3 times in a row doesn't help in different
I
translations, then yeah,
I feel like there are at least a few sentences in here that we actually decoded. That
yeah,
like
we did.
I would not have been able to do so before. And maybe that's what this requires, which just means it is not only impossible to do justice to on close reads, but it's probably impossible to do justice to, period, without devoting your life to this book.
Yeah, and all because it's poorly written. Let's
Well,
just let's
and
just
this
face
makes
it.
me,
He could have been clear.
whatever you might think of the Sadler half hour, the fact that he got through the whole book and he presented this, with in that form of I don't know, it seems like it's a great service to mankind.
Yeah.
So thanks
Well,
everybody. If you like
yeah.
this, yeah, sure, go give us 5 stars on the iTunes store, whatnot. You can, if you want to get this part two, you do have to pay us money. You have to go to patreon.com/close reads philosophy. And or if you're a partially examined life supporter, you just update your support there to the $10 level from the $7 level. So it's actually a little cheaper to do them as a bulk than to do $5 by itself on the standalone Patreon close reads page. But in any case, however many of these we do, whether it's 2 or maybe 8 to get through the whole thing, you will witness it all. Otherwise, we'll see you when we see you. Bye.
All right.